Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents We Are Not One People, Secession and Separatism in American Politics Since 1776, by Michael J. Lee and R. Jarrod Atchison, narrated by Danny Campbell. Epigraph. We must also remember what our service personnel know better than anyone, that we are one people, with one home and one glorious American destiny. We come from all different walks of life, but we all share the same dream, to live in peace and safety, to work with honor and dignity, and to build a better future for those we love. Donald Trump, 2017. The pundits like to slice and dice our country into red states and blue states for Republicans, blue states for Democrats. But I've got news for them, too. We worship an awesome God in the blue states, and we don't like federal agents poking around our libraries in the red states. We coach Little League in the blue states and have gay friends in the red states. There are patriots who opposed the war in Iraq and patriots who supported it. We are one people, all of us pledging allegiance to the Stars and Stripes, all of us defending the United States of America. Barack Obama, 2004. This has been an extraordinary election, but in one of God's unforeseen paths, this belatedly broken impasse can point us all to a new common ground, for its very closeness can serve to remind us that we are one people with a shared history and a shared destiny. Indeed, that history gives us many examples of contests as hotly debated as fiercely fought, with their own challenges to the popular will. Other disputes have dragged on for weeks before reaching resolution, and each time both the victor and the vanquished have accepted the result peacefully and in spirit of a reconciliation. So let it be with us. Al Gore, 2000. A nation derives its soul, strength, and character from the sum of the creative efforts of all its citizens. While we are a nation of more than 230 million individuals, we are one people, interdependent on each other for our accomplishments and our future. Ronald Reagan, 1982. America still is going through an agony of transition. It takes time for old myths to give way to new awareness. It takes time to erase the old stereotypes. But the point is that we are moving forward, and moving rapidly, toward what the Riot Commission refers to as a single society, one nation, one people, one common ideal, in which each person is measured as an individual, and in which legal rights are fleshed out with actual opportunities. We must do more, but if progress is to be made, the first essential now is order. Richard Nixon, 1968. The federal government ought to be, and is, solicitous for the welfare of every one of its inhabitants, every one of its business activities, whether they be small or great. This is one country. We are one people united by common interests. There should be no favorites and no outcasts, no race or religious prejudices in government. America opposes special privilege for anybody and favors equal opportunity for everybody. It has adopted these principles because they are the logical conclusions of our ideals of freedom. Calvin Coolidge, 1924. In this land of the free, we are burned, tortured, and denied a fair trial, murdered for any imaginary wrong conceived in the brain of the Negro-hating white man. There is no redress for us from a government which promised to protect all under its flag. It seems a mystery to me. They say one flag, one nation, one country, indivisible. Is this true? Can we say this truthfully, when one race is allowed to burn, hang, and inflict the most horrible torture weekly, monthly on another? No. We cannot sing, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty." It is hollow mockery. Susie King Taylor, 1902. We are two peoples, essentially different in all that makes a people. Robert Barnwell Rhett, 1860. We are not one people, we are two peoples. We are a people for freedom and a people for slavery. Between the two, conflict is inevitable. Horace Greeley, 1855. We must remember it is the most difficult process in the world to make two people of one. John C. Calhoun, 1838. The people of the United States formed the Constitution, acting through the state legislatures in making the compact, to meet and discuss its provisions, and acting in separate conventions when they ratified those provisions. But the terms used in its construction show it to be a government in which the people of all the states collectively are represented. We are one people in the choice of president and vice president. Andrew Jackson, 1832. The unity of government which constitutes you one people is also now dear to you. It is justly so, for it is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, the support of your tranquillity at home, your peace abroad, of your safety, of your prosperity, of that very liberty which you so highly prize. But as it is easy to foresee that, from different causes and from different quarters, much pains will be taken, many artifices employed to weaken in your minds the conviction of this truth. George Washington, 1796. Prologue. Alexander Hamilton coined the name Whiskey Rebellion to suggest that the Pennsylvanians revolting against federal authority in 1794 were a confederacy of drunkards. Thomas Jefferson called it Hamilton's insurrection, suggesting that his fellow founder distorted the ordinary grievances of frontier farmers into an existential threat to get his political wish, federal authority. Hamilton's name stuck, but not because it was more accurate than Jefferson's. The Whiskey Rebellion was about whiskey in the same sense that the American Revolution was about tea. The land west of the Alleghenies had been the frontier since long before the Revolutionary War. Pittsburgh had just 1,000 residents in 1794. Gold and silver coins were rare. Since whiskey had supplanted rum and brandy as Americans' drink of choice, it held a consistent value for many small farmers who produced it at community stills. Whiskey became liquid currency. Landlords accepted whiskey as rent, and laborers accepted grain used to make whiskey as wages. The entire community ran on whiskey. 1/4 of the nation's stills operated there, and the strong rye whiskey distilled in the region's rounded hills carried brand recognition as far away as New Orleans. An excise tax is a tax on a specific good, but western Pennsylvania's experienced the whiskey tax that Hamilton championed in 1791 as an existence tax. The tax, moreover, had to be paid in coin, and if the tax went unpaid or an unregistered still was discovered, tax collectors were authorized to seize the whiskey and the still, both property and currency. Frontier Pennsylvanians began revolting against federal authority immediately after its passage. Gangs dressed as Native Americans enslaved people, and women tortured collectors of the excise tax. This resistance in western Pennsylvania had been flaring for 3 years when local irregulars tried to kill one tax collector and burn down another's house. Between 1791 and the fall of 1794, these spasmodic attacks on tax collectors coalesced into something more organized, more coherent, a maturing secession movement. Rebels adopted a totemic flag with 6 stripes to symbolize the number of counties in active rebellion. These whiskey rebels, many of whom were veterans of the Revolution, were loosely organized near where the Allegheny and Monongahela joined, forming the Ohio River. In August 1794, 6,000 rebels gathered at Braddock's Field, where, in 1755, British troops, despite the considerable battlefield daring of the 23-year-old George Washington, had been massacred by French and Native American guerrillas. This frontier crowd heard speakers encourage the seizure of a local federal armory and, emulating the revolutionaries in France, the creation of a committee of public safety and the assembly of guillotines. These Pennsylvania rebels, of course, opposed the disparate impact of the whiskey tax, but their brief revolt fundamentally disturbed both the theory and practice of American democracy's untested ideals: liberty, self-determination, sovereignty, federalism, popular rule, the rule of law, minority rights, the limits of protest, presidential power, and whether one people's folkways must submit to we the people's commercial civilization. The burgeoning American commercial civilization needed money. The new country had war debts to pay, and at the time the excise tax was pivotal to federal financial solvency. Hamilton thought that taxing spirits would, as he outlined in Federalist 12, both tamp down a national extravagance and furnish a considerable revenue. Hamilton was not alone in worrying about both federal coffers and laws. Washington also wrote that the whiskey crisis could end the American experiment. If the laws are to be trampled upon with impunity, and a minority is to dictate to the majority, there is an end put at one stroke to Republican government. Both feared that the whiskey revolt was already spreading to other states. But as Ron Chernow has rendered him, Hamilton, scarred by dreadful childhood hardships, was haunted by the hobgoblins of disorder. He urged Washington to assert federal authority definitively, especially in the hinterlands. Washington agreed. 7 years after Pennsylvania became the first large state to ratify the Constitution, it became the first state of any size to revolt against it. With the capital in Philadelphia, a conflict between eastern and western Pennsylvania was both provincial and national. Washington called up 13,000 militia troops from several states. Henry Knox, then Secretary of War, was unavailable to command this ad hoc force. His rash investment in 1 million acres in Maine had gone south, and he was away from the capital tending to personal business. Instead, Washington named Henry Light Horse Harry Lee III, then governor of Virginia, Major General. Washington set Carlisle, Pennsylvania, 200 miles east of Pittsburgh, as a rendezvous point with the counterinsurgency troops, and he and Hamilton set off to war down Market Street in a shared carriage. As an uprising, the Whiskey Rebellion was trivial. Threatened by 13,000 organized soldiers descending the Alleghenies' western edge, the Pennsylvania freedom fighters scattered before any combat commenced. Many fled the region entirely. Only 2 rebel leaders were formally convicted of treason and scheduled for the gallows. Washington, exercising this power of the office for the first time, pardoned them both over Hamilton's objections. This business must not be skimmed over, Hamilton urged unsuccessfully. The political purification of Pennsylvania is greater than I had any idea of. As a dramatic display of the ever-present tensions of disunion that dogged the evolving American nation, the Whiskey Rebellion was both momentous and portentous. First, the battle may have been a non-event, but federal troops occupied the area nonetheless. Washington, in ill health, traveled back to Philadelphia after the Carlisle meet-up. He gave Hamilton and Lee, essentially dual commanders, explicit instructions that troops were to conduct an occupation without acting as occupiers. Conflicts over spirits aside, this was, after all, an American army interacting with other Americans. Washington knew that frontier submission to federal law would be especially unlikely after wholesale slaughter or the creation of martyrs. The extent to which Hamilton and Lee followed the first president's advice is debatable. Lee amnestied over Hamilton's objections yet again, all but the most violent rebels, but American troops did, at bayonet point, round up, imprison, interrogate, and torture hundreds of American citizens. Second, the lives and legacies, both personal and familial, of Washington, Hamilton, and Lee highlight the enduring difficulty of balancing federalism and anti-federalism, of harmonizing liberty and union, calibrating individuality and community, reconciling local and national, pairing disagreement and order. This was neither the trio's first campaign together nor their first brush with revolutionary secession. They had played an opposite role in that first campaign, however. Nearly 2 decades prior, Washington, Hamilton, and Lee had agitated on behalf of disaffected backwoods colonies against an overbearing state. Hamilton had been Washington's trusted aide-de-camp during the Revolution. Lee was his ruthless guerrilla commander. In 1777, Hamilton and Lee, anticipating a British assault on Philadelphia, executed a bold scorched-earth maneuver together when Washington ordered them to torch flour mills on the Schuylkill River before the British could seize them. Hamilton was nearly killed. Much of Hamilton's career as a post-revolutionary statesman was devoted to preventing the country from fracturing. His overwhelming passion was the strength and stability of the Union. His death, in fact, was a Unionist act. His duel with Aaron Burr, of course, was prompted by Burr's accusation that Hamilton had slandered him. Nevertheless, New England Federalists worried about the expansion of slavery and Southern slave power and talked openly of secession if Thomas Jefferson won the 1804 election. Burr, Jefferson's sitting vice president, knew he would be dropped from the re-election ticket. For his next act, he hoped to become New York's governor and lead the state into this New England splinter group. Hamilton fretted about Burr and his breakaway Confederacy. The night before the Weehawken duel, Hamilton wrote a friend in Massachusetts of the self-destructive threat secession posed. Secession occupied his mind immediately after the duel, on his final night as well. As Hamilton succumbed to Burr's bullet, some of his last recorded words were, "If they break this union, they will break my heart." Hamilton and Washington occupied 2 different points on a large spectrum between liberty and union. At times in his life, Lee occupied various points on this spectrum. At others, he took more radical positions, leaning toward anarchy or toward tyranny. He won glory as the commander of a nimble light infantry force during the Revolutionary War, but he was excessive, even medieval, in his punishment of deserters, and he butchered loyalist civilians, fellow colonials. He was court-martialed twice, though acquitted both times. As a war hero, he brought tremendous recognition to his family, but he also managed to be written out of 2 wills, his first wife's and his father's. In one historian's estimation, Lee was a patriot and scoundrel, upright citizen and confidence man, benefactor and deceiver. Assessing his hunger for power, ruthlessness, and opportunism, Hamilton saw Julius Caesar or Cromwell in Lee. Lee is a cautionary tale for both freedom run amok and unity pursued unmercifully. He was a promoter of common fealty to a central authority, while also a selfish flouter of familial, social, and political norms. Lee favored a strong federal government while serving in the Continental Congress, then whipsawed in the other direction, allegedly due to a rebuke from Hamilton when Lee requested advance knowledge of a ruling on local and national currencies, textbook insider trading. His adoption of anti-federalism was convincing enough for the Virginia state legislature to appoint him governor, a largely ceremonial job. Curiously, Lee advocated changing "we the people" to "we the states" during the ratification debates. Befitting his erratic politics, Lee even began to negotiate a generalship in the Revolutionary French Army in 1792, only to be talked down by Washington and others. Once the Whiskey Rebellion began, Lee cherished his new title of Major General and, a Federalist once more, warned of unruly mobs. He would not find glory, martial or otherwise, again. In 1794, Lee left Pennsylvania without a fight, but returned to Virginia to find he was without a job. He had been ousted from office in absentia. Shifting from amassing public glory to accumulating private wealth, Lee tried to become a proper American baron instead. He invested in more than 100,000 acres of land scattered from Georgia to Pennsylvania. It all failed, and Lee spent 2 years in debtor's prison beginning in 1808. After being disfigured and nearly killed by, oddly enough, a Baltimore mob of pro-war rioters in 1812, Lee abandoned his family, his country, and his remaining debtors. He wandered the Caribbean for 5 years. In failing health, he tried to return to Virginia but did not make it, dying on Cumberland Island off the Georgia coast in 1818. One of his children, Henry Black Horse Harry Lee IV, would contribute to the enduring argument over the union of these United States as John C. Calhoun's speechwriter. 4 decades later, Light Horse Harry's youngest son, Robert Edward, fought in earnest to ensure that the Union perished from the earth. Professional and amateur historians have speculated, some quite wildly, about the psychological impact Harry Lee's public and private indiscretions had on Robert Edward, who was 11 when his derelict father died. A divisible nation. E pluribus unum was suggested for the national seal by Pierre-Eugène du Semetier in 1776. We argue that this notion of national oneness has been haunted by its twin, E pluribus pluria, ever since. American schism was not some wrenching national growing pain that ended in an Appomattox courthouse. The Civil War wiped out the armies of secession, not the prominence of separatism in American political culture. We are not one people is a broad examination of the disunionists who have unmade the nation since 74 Constitution conventioneers designed a more perfect union. The persistence of American separatist rhetoric reveals as much about the nation's politics as it does the would-be separatists. That is, great swaths of Americans of every ideological stripe, in good times and bad, in and beyond the South, disputed the nation's oneness and its indivisibility. Separatist rhetoric has shaped Americans' experience of what it means to be an American. To show that they never felt what James Madison named the chords of affection, to prove that what he called kindred blood flowed in fewer veins, Americans have warred to leave the nation. Aiming to become a new people in departure, they have also just left. Inveighing against the nation's oppression of their people, they have fled to found godly republics, green kingdoms, or in one case, an opt-in society, ultimately outside the United States, run by technology. They have also pledged disallegiance in off-the-grid enclaves to escape national oversight. They have sought their own spaces to live in racial solidarity, to achieve oneness in gender, to prepare for the end times, to revel in Stone Age simplicity and rewilding compounds. They have forsworn the disappointing world of human affairs and gravitated toward the succor of the natural world, its promise of reprieve preferable to the grime of the present. They have sojourned into the wild, disengaged from mass culture, beyond judicial oversight, where they carry weapons, think of themselves as warriors, and refuse to acknowledge any allegiance to the devices of what we fondly call our democracy. They have walled themselves off, both literally and figuratively, to experiment in utopian living. They have also built decidedly on-the-grid citadels of separatism. In what one writer called the quiet wave of school secession, scores of wealthy white communities, particularly in the South, have left integrated schools by creating new districts, even new towns, such as Gardendale, Alabama. Severing their ties to American cities, many white Americans after the 1960s thought and spoke in decidedly secessionist terms, defending their freedom of association as they emigrated to the spatially and socially removed lands of suburbia. Parents of the counterculture left and the religious right have opted for homeschooling rather than public schools. Selecting certain states such as New Hampshire or Utah or Kansas as strategic staging grounds, they have migrated internally to live among the like-minded in some semblance of territorial autonomy. Others have opted for seclusion, solidarity, and urban quarters, where they frequented maverick bars, bookstores, music vendors, coffee houses, and clubs in distinct neighborhoods, a world apart, yet a stone's throw from millions of other city dwellers. They have sued for exemptions to federal laws. They have set up parallel public institutions, including hospitals, banks, and more. The wealthy Robert Reich lamented in 1991, have withdrawn their money from public use and built gates around themselves to live in open secession in networked private health spas, elite schools, beaches, islands, and resorts, with revealing names like Secession Golf Club in coastal South Carolina. Some separatists did not go anywhere, but, as one libertarian secessionist suggested, stayed put. Secession really begins at home, with the actions we all take in our everyday lives to distance and remove ourselves from state authority, quietly, non-violently, inexorably. For the electronically inclined, the possibility of online freedom, where cyber seceders, virtual selves, could become immune to national power, held real promise. Still, other separatists have focused their efforts even further internally, guarding the realm of the psyche against cultural incursions. Black is a country, Amiri Baraka wrote. Various writers have diagnosed the country's slumbering secession obsession, the grip of its secession fever, the resonance of its secessionist ethos, the extraordinarily privileged position of exit in the nation's political traditions. Disunion, Richard Kreitner notes in Break It Up, 2020, is one of the nation's only truly national ideas. We are not one people, however, is a novel take on the symbolic resonance of separatism, secession, and a family of disintegrative concepts across varied groups throughout the nation's history. Valuable studies of specific separatists abound. Histories of the 40 separatists who landed in Cape Cod above the Mayflower in 1620, or chronicles of Southern secession, but these are limited to specific groups in particular eras. Separatism's power in America is symbolic. Its purchase is cultural. Secession is likely the most serious constitutional question ever to arise in America, in one scholar's judgment, but separatism's multi-century, intergroup, trans-ideological influence cannot be accounted for solely by attending to questions of legality or illegality. In this book, we treat separatism as a political language. Separatism is spoken, written, and performed to entice audiences to exit the nation in one way or another. Its speakers blend their group's particular patois with iconic American narratives to achieve disaggregating ends. We Are Not One People is about groups of Americans, some eccentric, some thoughtful, some reckless, all audacious, from 1776 to the present, who gave up, moved on, and opted out. People who tried to bring forth on this continent or another a new nation. Groups both marginal and mainstream, wielders of and aliens from political power, have used a common political language to withdraw from American laws, American politics, American culture, and the American public, and whatever subjugation, norms, practices, obligations, customs, or laws they thought citizenship entailed. Nevertheless, since they cited the hallmark moments and national heroes of the nation's history, they withdrew as Americans. They cited the nation to undo it. We Are Not One People joins a growing number of books about American disunity, disintegration, fragmentation, and unraveling. chronicles of a splintered public sphere in which, as Ira Glass, host of This American Life, said half in jest, everyone in the country hates...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?